Hi there. So I received an email from a student this morning asking a question that I get asked all the time in math classes. And so as I was writing out my response to her, I figured that this was probably something that really everybody could benefit from hearing about. So there's no video component of this really, so I just figured I would settle us on baby animals in case you wanted to watch this, but really it's pretty much audio only. So the question that she asked me was basically, she said, I'm starting to get nervous about our first test. I'm studying and I put in hours and hours of tutoring and practicing. I find that I understand almost everything with my tutor, but even a few hours after I'm finished studying, I feel like I have to relearn everything over again. She says, every day I'm working hard and putting in that time, but I just feel like I forget half of what I learn. And so then the test comes around and I get anxiety, so then it's 100 times worse. And she asks me if I have any tips. And so I'm going to kind of paraphrase my response, which I will also post along with this video. But so basically I said, there are a few reasons that this happens. And if we know about them, it's really helpful in kind of strategizing and working around those sort of physical limitations, which is really what she's experiencing and what you guys are experiencing when you feel like you've tried to learn math and it just hasn't stuck. So there are a few reasons that this happens. So the first is that when we learn new material, we're actually creating connections in our brains between our neurons. So you can Google it, but neurons are kind of weird looking. They look like face huggers from Aliens a little bit. They're sort of long and skinny, and they have a fat part, and off of that fat part comes these things called dendrites, which look like little hairs, and they connect to other neurons around them. And so basically the idea is that the more dendrites that you have between two neurons, the faster the electrical impulses between those neurons can travel. And so you can look up more about this too, but there are brain scans of people who, as they learn things, you can see, as the weeks go on, as they continue taking brain scans of people learning new material, you can see more and more dendrites growing, and you can see the neural connections actually thickening up in those regions of the brain that are used. So when we learn something, our body is actually physically changing in order to facilitate the flow of that information in our brain. And so it's really just like how exercise causes us to build up more muscle fibers. And so, it takes time for our bodies to actually build up something physical. So we can't just grow our dendrites overnight, just like we can't grow our muscles overnight. So the other thing with our bodies is that our evolutionary standpoint is that we want to conserve calories, right? So we don't want to waste calories on things that aren't useful to our bodies. And so as we grow new dendrites, just like when we grow new muscles, we're spending calories. And so we really have to convince our bodies that, hey, this isn't just a one-time thing. You're not just going to grow all these dendrites and then not use them. This is something that we need in the long run. And so what studying does is it activates those areas of the brain over and over and over again, and it convinces our bodies, hey, it would make a lot of sense calorically, since we're using all of this energy in this region, to have stronger connections that are more efficient. So the way that we convince our bodies to spend those calories and spend that energy and time is to use those regions over and over again, and then we get more efficient. We get faster and better at doing those things. So in the same way that, if you want to have muscles, you don't go to the gym 1 or 2 times, because that doesn't convince your body, hey, build up some new muscles. We're going to be using these all the time. You can't just study a little bit here and there and convince your brain to build up those connections. And in the same way, just like if you went to the gym really hard for a week, you get some growth, right? But if you study for a week really hard, you get some growth, but it's not the same as somebody who's going to the gym for years. It's not the same as somebody who's been studying for years. So that's one kind of main thing to think about in terms of studying, that you really are trying to convince your body that this is something you're going to be doing all the time, and you need to do it well, and then you'll get better at it. So the other thing is that if we are able to convince our brains, let's make these connections strong, let's make some dendrites, we need to make sure that we're convincing our brains to build the right kinds of connections. So, for example, and this is an extreme example, but if you watch YouTube videos about math for an hour a day for a month, your brain would have excellent practice at watching YouTube videos and thinking about math. But then if you sat down to take the test, your brain wouldn't have had any practice, wouldn't have built up, very many connections at all with sitting down with a blank sheet of paper in front of you and then working out that math problem from start to finish. So, like I said, it's an extreme example, but I do have a lot of students who are telling me, well, I spent a lot of time reading the textbook, I spent a lot of time using flashcards, or, I get through all the homework, but I use Help Me Solve This, or show me an example, and then I bomb the test. And so, what I hear when a student tells me that is I hear them saying that they've strengthened their textbook reading neurons, they've strengthened their recognition neurons, they've strengthened all the neurons involved with doing a problem with help, so following along with the Help Me Solve This, they're really good at that, but they haven't strengthened all of the connections with sitting down with a blank sheet of paper in front of them and working out the problem totally on their own. So, just like if you were going to run a marathon and you spent hours in the gym for months lifting weights, would that help you? Yeah, definitely. It would help you a little bit. But is it the most efficient way to train and prepare for the marathon? No. I mean, what do you do in the marathon? You run long distances. So how should you train? You should run long distances. I mean, if you're starting out, training for the marathon and you're in really bad shape, you'd want to start by walking. You'd want to start by running short distances. You might go to the gym and lift weights, just to kind of get, your legs in better shape and things like that. So that's kind of like, reading the textbook. If you're not, confident that you can go in and ace the math test, how are you going to start? You're going to read the textbook. You're going to look at notes. You're going to use Help Me Solve This. But what's your end goal? To be able to do those problems on your own without any help. So, reading the textbook and using Help Me Solve This and all of that, that's kind of like, starting to walk, starting to exercise a little bit in the gym. You're getting to where you can start trying to run long distances so that you can start practicing, for running the marathon. You're getting to where you can start doing problems on your own without help so that you can practice for taking the test without any help. So that's a really big key idea right there. And then kind of the third thing to think about as far as the anxiety piece is that when we get anxious, our body is ramping up production of adrenaline. So that's what's happening there. So adrenaline is a hormone that's super important from our caveman days. It's the fight or flight hormone. So, think about it in terms of the caveman. If you see a predator and you need to avoid being eaten, what adrenaline is going to do for you is it's going to shut down your brain, it's going to shut down digestion, it's going to make all that energy go to your muscles, and it's going to help you focus on your physical strength so that you can either battle that predator or run as fast as you can, which is awesome. Perfect. That's exactly what you need to happen. Except that the adrenaline also gets triggered, in the modern era when you're trying to do something that requires mental acuity, like give a speech to a room full of people or take a math test. And so, unfortunately, shutting down your brain and running really fast is not the best strategy for doing well in math. So if you get anxious during a task that requires brain power, pretty much what you need to do is use some strategies to flush that adrenaline out of your system so that you can think clearly again. And there aren't a whole lot of things that you can really do other than just sort of waiting it out. So letting that adrenaline ebb naturally. You can do deep breathing and mindfulness meditation kind of exercises. That could be something to Google if you find like you're really having trouble with anxiety, just sort of practicing some meditation, clearing your mind, focusing on your breathing does help. You can also try to physically flush out some of that adrenaline because the adrenaline is all about, again, getting those muscles to move. And so if we move those muscles, that starts to flush some of the adrenaline out of our system. So, if you shake a leg, sometimes you see like people who are anxious, right? They're just twitchy, right? That's a consequence of the adrenaline. If it's possible, you could take a quick walk. So just kind of, again, burning out some of that physical hormone. You can also clench and unclench your leg muscles if you can't take a walk, because again, what that's doing is that's stimulating the muscles, and that's, working with your biology to flush that adrenaline out. But I think the important thing to kind of think about there is that, this isn't happening because there's something wrong with you, right? This is your body doing exactly what it's, sort of designed to do, right? To keep you safe and get you out of harm's way. It's just that in the last few hundred years, things have changed a little bit, and so running away is not always the answer. So in summary, what I said to the student, and so what I would say to anybody who's feeling this way, is that what you're experiencing is totally normal. The best way that you can combat, kind of this feeling of material not sticking and not feeling like your studying is paying off, is to study in small chunks as frequently as you can by working out problems from start to finish with no notes and no help. And that's because you're recreating that testing environment, and that those small chunks are reinforcing for your brain that this is something you're going to be doing all the time. So let's get really good at doing this. But that being said, you have to get to the point where it's possible to do that first, right? So that's really talking about studying. That's how we study, with no notes and no help. But before you get to that point, that's where you're learning. So learning and studying are not exactly the same thing. So learning is where, we get tutoring, we read the book, we watch videos, we use Help Me Solve This. That's where we're putting everything together so we understand the concept. So that we're able to then study with no notes and no help to reinforce. But one other thing, that I sort of want to outline is kind of how the day-to-day process of this would go. So what I said to the student who is working with a tutor, but this would work even if you're not working with a tutor, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But what I did is sort of outline the process for her. And so what I said was, if I were working with a tutor, here's what I would do. So first, I would try to do all of my homework before meeting with the tutor. So this is giving you sort of efficiency of your time with the tutor, so that's a little more tutor specific, because especially, if you're going to the tutoring center, you're only going to have a few minutes at a time with the tutors, or if you're paying a tutor, by the hour, you want to get the most out of that time. So I would try to do all of the homework before even going to the tutor. If I couldn't get something, and so this could be a little bit of material, it could be a lot of material, but if I didn't understand something, I would try to find my own mistakes, probably not really using too many resources, just checking my work for no more than 5 minutes per problem. So if you know you're going to go get help, you don't want to spend 30 minutes trying to understand something that a tutor could explain to you in a couple minutes. But I would try to spend a few minutes because like with studying, where you're building up those neural connections for learning the material and understanding the material, you also want to build up neural connections for finding mistakes. So that's a separate skill. So somebody who understands the material really well might not be great at, when they make a little dumb mistake like missing a negative sign, looking over that material and finding that missing negative sign. That's a separate skill. And so that's also something that you want to practice, because that's also helpful for your math test. But anyway, so I wouldn't spend more than 5 minutes per problem, but I would spend that 5 minutes, practicing the skill of finding mistakes. If I were stuck on something, I would put a star next to it. And then I would go to the tutor. If I weren't working with a tutor, if I were just, using the resources available to me, this is where I might look up a YouTube video or use Help Me Solve This. So I would try to learn I would try to learn more about the topics that I'm confused about. Now, if you are working with a tutor, I would suggest don't let the tutor pick up the pencil. You don't want the tutor doing work for you, because when the tutor works out a problem for you, that's where you get that false sense of security. You see them do it, they explain it, it feels really good in your brain, like, oh, I see what's happening, but that's where you're enforcing those watching neurons and not the doing neurons, right? So I would get help to where I feel like I could try the problem again. And then I would rework those starred problems completely on my own without the tutor's help. So here's where the tutor is, going and grabbing a snack or whatever, helping somebody else, and I'm practicing doing the problem from start to finish. If I understand it, that's awesome. If not, I would talk to the tutor again. But I'm still not letting them do the problem for me, because that would be stealing my opportunity, right, to practice. And sometimes it could take a couple times, but, this is an important part of the process. Struggling and feeling confused, I think that's something that we kind of try to avoid in this culture, but it's actually really helpful. So, again, going back to brain research, we learn a ton when we are making mistakes. We learn a ton when we do things wrong. And we actually don't learn so much when we just watch somebody do something perfectly. So if you're sitting there with the pencil in your hand, making dumb mistakes left and right, graphing a line wrong, factoring incorrectly, whatever it is that you're doing it wrong, you're actually learning a lot, because then when you go back and you get that help on what did you do, your brain has context to not only see, oh, okay, not this way, but this way, this is how we do it. But you also now know what kinds of mistakes you make, and so you can sort of hook that on to how to not make those mistakes in the future. You understand why the mistake you made was wrong. So there's a lot of good information and learning that goes on when we make mistakes. Whereas when we watch somebody do something perfectly, or even ourselves, we do something perfectly, we don't get a lot of context for what's wrong and why and what can go wrong and things like that. So don't feel like mistakes are wasted time. Mistakes are actually the most productive use of your time. So mistakes are fantastic, really. Okay, so again, back to how I would kind of work through this. So I would always be trying to do problems with no notes and no help, and then if I get stuck, I get the minimum amount of help possible to try it again. But I really don't want any time where someone is explaining something to you is in a sense wasted time. So you want to minimize that as much as possible. It's not productive to your learning. Any explanation, so here I am beating a dead horse, right, over explaining things. So any time, though, that somebody is explaining something to you that you already are kind of understanding, you're wasting time because you're not practicing it on your own. Okay, so, as far as working on the homework goes, I would say that I would never want to have a single homework problem that I have not done completely by myself from start to finish. So if I used Help Me Solve This on something, or if I used Show Me an Example on something, cool, that was useful to getting my learning off the ground. But I would go back and do it as a part of studying with no notes and no help. If I have a single problem that I got through using a resource, I really didn't practice that problem effectively yet. Okay, so I also, would say that as a bonus, the more prepared you are by studying correctly, so studying in the way that I just outlined, the less likely you're going to feel anxiety in the first place, because you're not going into a test with all of these watching and observing neurons. You're going into a test with all of these doing by myself neurons, right? So you already are more prepared than perhaps you've been in the past. And so that alone should cut down on the anxiety. But like I said, if you still are prone to, getting stressed out by things and by getting anxiety, I would look into mindfulness, and I would think about breathing and, clearing your mind and working on, kind of overcoming your biology in that way. So that's pretty much, those are my tips. Those are my strategies. So it really just comes down to time and practice, because you're actually convincing your body to build new physical structures. So, what I'll close with is that this really isn't an intelligence thing. It's a perseverance thing, right? So you have to think of it like you're learning to play an instrument, or learning a new language, or training for a marathon. It's the exact same concept when you're learning math. You're not flawed because you weren't born being able to play the oboe, right? So if you wanted to play the oboe, you'd practice it every day. You wouldn't watch videos of people playing the oboe. You wouldn't go, pay a lot of money for lessons to watch your instructor play the oboe. You would get in there and you would play the oboe yourself. So same thing with math, right? And if you're learning to play the oboe and you've got a concert coming up and you're going to have to play without your sheet music in front of you, you wouldn't practice all the time with your sheet music in front of you, because then when you go onto the stage, you're going to get stage fright. You've never practiced without your music, right? Even if you can play it flawlessly, with your sheet in front of you, even if you could play it with your sheet in front of you but not looking at the sheet, still there's something physically different about knowing that you could look that changes the equation. So, with math, even if you just are studying where you've got your notes open but you're not really looking at them, but you could if you needed to, it kind of changes the equation, pun intended. But it does. It kind of changes the equation a little bit versus the test where you just don't have that open notebook. So I would even encourage you, to, when it comes time to study, really put everything away. Pretend you are taking the test. And that's going to help you to combat that anxiety and really feel prepared. So, okay. That's really it. Thanks for listening, and I really hope you found this helpful.